On a crisp morning, the air sharp with the scent of pine and diesel, a young military police officer named Private Ellis approached an old man lingering near the base's perimeter fence. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid with the weight of duty, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Sir, you can't stay here anymore," he said, his voice firm, yet tinged with reluctance. New regulations had tightened like a vice around the base, driven by vague but ever-present security concerns. The old man, Walter, stood with a stillness that seemed to anchor him to the earth. His weathered face, etched with lines that told of countless unspoken stories, remained calm. Without a word of protest, he nodded, his gray eyes steady, and shuffled across the street. He settled just far enough to satisfy the rules, but close enough to maintain his quiet vigil, a solitary figure clutching a worn bucket and broom. For 3 days, this fragile compromise held, a delicate balance between authority and Walter's unspoken resolve. Walter's days were marked by routine, a rhythm that gave him purpose. Each morning, he'd sweep the sidewalk near the base's entrance, collecting stray leaves and cigarette butts with a care that bordered on reverence. His hands, calloused and trembling slightly, moved with a precision born of habit. In his mind, he wasn't just cleaning. He was preserving something intangible, a connection to a past he rarely spoke of but could never escape. The base, with its hum of activity and clatter of boots, felt like the last tether to a life he'd once known, a life of camaraderie, sacrifice, and loss. He didn't resent the young MP's warning. He understood the weight of orders, but leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. On the fourth day, the fragile truce shattered. Two security officers, their faces set in stern lines, approached Walter as he stood by the curb, his broom resting against his shoulder. The older of the two, Officer Grant, spoke first, his voice flat but unyielding. "We've had complaints, sir. You need to move on. Permanently." Walter's heart sank, a quiet ache spreading through his chest. He'd never meant to cause trouble. "I don't make a fuss," he said, his voice steady despite the years of silence that had worn it thin. "I just keep things tidy." The words carried a quiet dignity, a plea wrapped in simplicity. Grant's partner, Officer Reyes, shook his head. "This area is around a military installation, sir. It's not for civilians to maintain. Please gather your things." Walter's shoulders slumped as he bent to pick up his bucket, his movements slow and deliberate. As he reached for his cleaning supplies, a small metal box slipped from his jacket pocket, hitting the pavement with a sharp clatter. The lid sprang open, spilling its contents onto the sidewalk like secrets too long confined. A purple heart medal glinted in the sunlight, its purple ribbon faded but intact. Beside it lay a worn photograph of young soldiers standing proudly in front of a helicopter, their faces alight with the reckless courage of youth. A weathered name patch, stitched with the name Douglas, rested atop the pile. Walter froze, his breath catching as memories flooded back. Memories of jungle heat, the roar of rotors, and names he hadn't spoken in decades. Grant knelt to retrieve the items, his fingers pausing as he studied the photograph. His eyes narrowed at the faded inscription along the bottom. Bravo 19, Operation Homeward 1976. The words stirred something in him, a flicker of recognition he couldn't place. "You were military?" he asked, his voice softening, the edge of authority giving way to curiosity. Walter's hands trembled as he reclaimed his possessions, tucking the box back into his pocket with a gentleness that spoke of its sacredness. "Once," he murmured, his gaze distant, "a lifetime ago." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Grant exchanged a glance with Reyes, a silent agreement passing between them. Something about this old man wasn't what it seemed. That afternoon, the base buzzed with a quiet intensity. Private Chen, a young soldier with a knack for noticing what others overlooked, delivered routine paperwork to headquarters. As he navigated the sterile corridors, he caught snippets of hushed conversation that prickled his curiosity. "Possible match to MIA records," one officer whispered, his voice taut with urgency. "Bravo 19 needs confirmation before we notify anyone." Chen's pulse quickened. He'd seen Walter every day, a fixture as constant as the flagpole, sweeping the sidewalk with a quiet determination that seemed to defy the world's indifference. The thought that this unassuming man might be tied to something larger, something lost to history, stirred a mix of awe and unease in Chen's chest. The next morning, Walter's absence was jarring. Chen scanned the perimeter during his patrol, his eyes lingering on the empty spot where the old man usually stood. A knot of worry tightened in his gut. Walter had never missed a day, not in the months Chen had been stationed here. The base felt emptier without him, as if a piece of its quiet rhythm had vanished. By afternoon, the base hummed with unusual activity. Whispers of an unscheduled visitor, a three-star general, rippled through the ranks. Lieutenant General Stanley Carter's motorcade rolled through the gates without fanfare, a stark contrast to the pomp that usually accompanied his rank. At 46, Carter was young for a general, his sharp features and piercing eyes softened only by the slight limp that marked his every step. A veteran of conflicts, both named and classified, he carried the weight of survival. His loyalty to his soldiers forged in the crucible of a mission that had nearly claimed his life. Chen, stationed at the perimeter, watched as Carter emerged from a meeting with the base commander. The general's face was unreadable, his gaze fixed on the main gate with an intensity that seemed to pull the air from the world around him. The base commander stepped forward, his voice deferential. "Sir, shall I have your driver?" Carter raised a hand, cutting him off. "Wait," he said, his voice low but firm. His eyes locked on a figure approaching from the bus stop across the street. Walter Douglas, bucket and broom in hand, moved with the same quiet purpose that had defined him for months. He seemed oblivious to the eyes now fixed on him, his focus solely on the task he'd appointed himself. But to Carter, that figure was more than an old man with a broom. It was a ghost from a past he'd never fully escaped, a reminder of promises made and brothers lost. Carter's heart pounded as he watched Walter resume his work, each sweep of the broom a deliberate act of defiance against time and forgetting. Memories surged, jungle mud, the crackle of radios, the weight of a mission that had cost too much. Bravo 19. Operation Homeward. The names echoed in his mind, pulling at scars he'd thought long healed. For Walter, the act of cleaning was more than habit. It was atonement, a way to keep faith with those who hadn't come home. As he swept, his thoughts drifted to the faces in that photograph, to the men who'd stood beside him in a world that no longer existed. He didn't know that across the street, a general stood frozen, grappling with the possibility that the man he'd thought lost forever had been here all along, quietly guarding a memory neither of them could let go. General Stanley Carter marched forward, his boots striking the pavement with purpose, each step a testament to his resolve despite the persistent ache in his leg, a lingering reminder of battles long past. His limp, subtle but ever-present, did nothing to slow his advance. The rigid structure of military protocol seemed to dissolve around him as he brushed past saluting officers, their crisp gestures unnoticed. His eyes were locked on one man, a figure so familiar, yet impossibly out of place. Walter Douglas, sweeping the courtyard with the broom, looked up just as Carter closed the distance. Time seemed to halt, the air thick with unspoken questions. Neither man spoke at first, their silence heavy with the weight of years and unspoken grief. Then, Carter's carefully maintained facade of command cracked, his voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "My God, Douglas, is it really you? We all thought you were gone, dead." The broom in Walter's hand slipped, clattering against the concrete with a jarring sound that echoed in the sudden stillness. His weathered face, lined with the scars of time and hardship, betrayed a flicker of shock. Then something deeper, perhaps shame, perhaps relief. "Guess you got that one wrong," he said softly, his voice carrying a trace of defiance, as if daring the world to challenge his existence. "Wouldn't be the first time someone misjudged me." Carter straightened, decades of military discipline snapping back into place like armor. "Captain Walter Douglas," he said, his tone steadying as he recited the title with reverence. "Commander of Special Operations Unit Bravo 19. Presumed killed in action, April 17, 1976. The words hung in the air, a solemn declaration that stirred the soldiers nearby. Private Chen, stationed at the gate, felt his breath catch in his throat, his pulse quickening as he realized he was witnessing history unfold. The other soldiers froze, their tasks forgotten, their eyes darting between the two men, sensing the gravity of the moment. Walter's gaze dropped to the ground, his shoulders sagging under the weight of a name he hadn't claimed in years. "Not killed," he murmured, his voice barely audible, as if the words were a confession he wasn't ready to make. "Just lost. For a long while." Base security moved swiftly, forming a perimeter to shield the two men from prying eyes. Carter gestured toward a nearby bench, and they sat, the world around them fading as their conversation began. What followed, pieced together later from hushed accounts and whispers among the ranks, was a story that defied the cold finality of official records. Walter Douglas had been the fearless leader of Bravo 19, an elite rescue unit sent on a covert mission deep in hostile territory. The operation was high stakes, the kind that never made it into public reports, a classified extraction of captured operatives. But the mission had gone catastrophically wrong. Under heavy enemy fire, their helicopter had been hit during the evacuation. In that chaotic moment, Walter had made a choice that would haunt him for decades. He stayed behind, laying down covering fire to ensure his team, including a young Lieutenant Stanley Carter, escaped with the rescued prisoners. Carter's voice broke as he leaned closer, his eyes searching Walter's face for answers. "You were listed as KIA, Douglas. We saw the explosion, the chopper. There was no way anyone could have survived." His hands clenched into fists, betraying the guilt that had gnawed at him for years, the belief that he'd left a brother behind. Walter's gaze drifted, lost in the haze of memory. "There was a ravine," he said, his voice distant, as if recounting a dream. "I fell. When I came to, the enemy had me." For 2 years, he endured captivity, isolated, interrogated, starved. His identity as a soldier, a commander, was preserved only by his ironclad refusal to break, to reveal his rank or the details of his mission. He was a ghost, a man without a name, clinging to the fragments of his duty. A prisoner exchange eventually freed him, but freedom came at a price. Malnutrition had ravaged his body, and trauma had fractured his mind. Severe PTSD clouded his memories, and by the time he was evacuated to a military hospital, his dog tags were long gone, his face unrecognizable from the official photographs in his file. "They didn't know who I was," Walter said, his voice heavy with resignation. "And for a while, neither did I." Carter listened, his heart pounding with a mix of awe and sorrow. He could still see the young captain in his mind, fearless, resolute, the kind of leader who inspired unwavering loyalty. Yet the man before him was a shadow of that figure, worn down by years of suffering. "By the time my memory started coming back," Walter continued, "years had passed. Bravo 19 was gone, disbanded. The mission was still classified, buried deep. I didn't feel worthy of coming back." His voice cracked, and he looked away, his eyes tracing the lines of the base's flagpole, where the stars and stripes fluttered in the breeze. "I failed, Stan. We were supposed to get everyone out. I left men behind." Carter's jaw tightened, his emotions warring between frustration and compassion. "Not worthy," he repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. "Douglas, 7 men made it home that day because of you. 7 men who were supposed to be in that godforsaken place. I was one of them." His words carried the weight of gratitude, of a debt he could never repay. "You didn't fail. The others, they were already gone when we got there. That wasn't on you. That was on faulty intel, on command's poor planning. You saved everyone who could be saved." Walter's hands trembled slightly, his fingers tracing the edge of the bench as if grounding himself in the present. The guilt had become a part of him, woven into the fabric of his being. He saw the faces of the men they couldn't save, heard their voices in the quiet moments of the night. To hear Carter absolve him felt like a lifeline, but one he wasn't sure he deserved. The 2 men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. Around them, the military police maintained a respectful distance, their presence a quiet acknowledgement of the moment's significance. But word of the encounter spread like wildfire through the base. Whispers of a lost hero's return, igniting a sense of wonder and pride among the ranks. By evening, the story had slipped beyond the confines of the base, leaking into the world outside. Walter Douglas, the man who had sacrificed everything, was no longer a footnote in a classified report. He was a living testament to courage, to survival, to the unbreakable bond between soldiers. And as Carter sat beside him, his heart swelled with a mix of relief and resolve. He would make sure the world knew what Walter had done, not just for the 7 men who came home, but for the ideals they all fought for. The story of Walter Douglas, a forgotten soldier whose life became a beacon of quiet heroism, began to ripple across social media in fragmented posts, accompanied by grainy, heartfelt images. One photo, slightly out of focus, captured a moment outside the rusted gates of Fort Richardson. An elderly man, his face etched with the weight of decades, stood in conversation with the General Marcus Carter. The general's posture was rigid with respect, his eyes carrying a glint of recognition and something deeper, guilt perhaps, or gratitude. The elderly man, Walter Douglas, stood unbowed despite his age, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, exuding a quiet strength that belied the years of obscurity he had endured. The images sparked curiosity, then awe, as whispers of his story spread like wildfire across the internet, igniting a collective sense of wonder and shame. A week later, the military orchestrated a formal ceremony, a grand affair steeped in solemnity and overdue justice. The event drew a crowd of weathered veterans from Bravo 19, their faces lined with the scars of battles fought long ago, alongside polished Department of Defense officials, their uniforms crisp but their expressions uneasy. Walter Douglas, for the first time in decades, donned a military uniform tailored to fit his slight frame. The fabric felt foreign against his skin, a reminder of a life he had once lived with pride, but had long since buried under layers of survival and solitude. As he stood at attention, his spine straight despite the ache of age, the weight of the moment pressed against his chest. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a reckoning, a public acknowledgement of a wrong that had festered for far too long. His status, once cruelly marked as killed in action, was officially corrected to retired with honor. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, as the crowd watched in reverent silence. The ceremony unfolded with a cascade of honors, medals gleaming with the promise of recognition, were pinned to Walter's chest, each one a small atonement for years of neglect. Back pay, calculated with interest that could never truly compensate for lost time, was presented with formal flourish. Offers of housing on any military base in the country were extended, a gesture meant to restore dignity to a man who had lived on the margins. Walter listened to each proclamation with a quiet dignity that seemed to anchor the room. His face, lined and stoic, betrayed little of the storm of emotions within. He felt the weight of every eye on him, the collective gaze of a nation trying to make amends. Yet his heart remained steady, grounded in a resilience forged through years of hardship. When the offers came, he declined most with a polite shake of his head, his voice soft but firm. Material gestures could not undo the past. When pressed for what he truly wanted, his request was so simple it stunned the room into silence. "I'd like permission to raise the flag at this base each morning." The base commander, a man accustomed to protocol and procedure, turned to General Carter, whose face softened with a rare vulnerability. Carter's nod was immediate, unwavering. "Captain Douglas has earned the right to raise any flag on any base in this country for as long as he wishes," he declared, his voice thick with conviction. "And I'd consider it a personal honor to have him do so." The words carried the weight of a debt that could never be fully repaid. Carter's heart, heavy with the knowledge of what Walter had sacrificed, pulsed with a mix of pride and sorrow. He had carried Walter's story like a stone in his chest for decades, and now, standing before the man who had saved his life, he felt both humbled and unworthy. Later, as the ceremony's formality gave way to quieter moments, a junior officer, emboldened by curiosity, pressed Carter about the unprecedented nature of Walter's request. The general's response, recorded for posterity, was raw and unfiltered, a rare glimpse into the soul of a man who had seen too much. "I've lived 46 years that weren't meant to be mine," Carter said, his voice low but steady, each word carved from a place of deep reckoning. "I've raised children who wouldn't exist if not for him. Every breath I've taken since April 17th, 1976, has been on borrowed time, time that Walter Douglas purchased with his sacrifice." His eyes, usually sharp with command, glistened with unshed tears. If he wants to raise our flag every morning until Judgment Day, then that's what he'll do. The officer, chastened by the general's intensity, could only nod, the gravity of Walter's sacrifice settling over him like a shroud. As Walter left the ceremony, his steps slow but deliberate, a young soldier approached him, Private Chen, his face flushed with a mix of shame and reverence. "Sir," Chen began, his voice trembling as he searched for words to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding. "I'm sorry for how we treated you. We didn't know." Walter paused, studying the young man's earnest face. Chen's apology carried the weight of every soldier who had dismissed Walter as just another old man, unaware of the hero beneath the weathered exterior. Walter's eyes, sharp despite their age, softened. "You brought me coffee on a cold day," he said simply, his voice warm with forgiveness. "That's all any of us can do. Small kindnesses when they're needed. The rest is just circumstance." He paused, then added, "Just say grateful if you wish you'd said thank you too." Chen's shoulders relaxed, a flicker of relief crossing his face as he nodded, the word grateful lingering unspoken but understood. In the years that followed, Walter Douglas became a living legend at Fort Richardson, known as the Flag Keeper. Each morning at precisely 0600 hours, regardless of rain, snow, or blistering heat, he raised the American flag with a reverence that bordered on sacred. His hands, gnarled but steady, handled each fold of the flag with care, as if it were a living thing, a symbol of the values he had carried through darkness. His movements were precise, a quiet echo of the military discipline that had never left him, even when the world had forgotten him. Though offered comfortable quarters on base, Walter chose a modest apartment nearby, a small space that felt like freedom after a lifetime of confinement. "I've had enough walls around me for one lifetime," he explained to those who asked, his voice tinged with a quiet resolve that invited no argument. Children from the base's family housing began to gather each morning, drawn first by curiosity about the old soldier whose story had become a local legend. Walter, once a solitary figure, found himself surrounded by young faces, their eyes wide with wonder as they watched the flag rise. Over time, he became more than a curiosity. He became a storyteller, though he spoke little of his own trials. Instead, he shared lessons of duty and sacrifice, his words simple but profound. "Duty isn't what you do when everyone's watching," he told them, his voice steady as he met their eager gazes. "It's what you do when no one will ever know." As the children listened, captivated, their young minds grappling with the weight of his words. For Walter, these moments were a quiet redemption, a chance to pass on the values that had sustained him through years of unimaginable hardship. 50 miles north, the military academy honored Walter in a different way, establishing the Walter Douglas Library of Military Ethics. The library, a quiet haven of books and manuscripts, housed texts on moral leadership and the human dimensions of warfare. Cadets were assigned to study Walter's case, not for its tactical lessons, but for the profound questions it raised about personal sacrifice and institutional responsibility. His story became a touchstone, a reminder that heroism often went unrecognized and that the military's duty to its soldiers extended beyond the battlefield. The cadets, many of whom would one day lead, carried Walter's story with them, a quiet challenge to be better, to do better. Before his retirement, General Carter took one final step to ensure Walter's legacy endured. He instituted the Douglas Protocol, a reform standard for investigating MIA cases, designed to prevent the kind of oversight that had left Walter forgotten for decades. The protocol was Carter's atonement, a way to honor the man who had given him a second chance at life. As he signed the order, Carter's hand trembled slightly, the weight of his debt to Walter pressing against him. He thought of April 17, 1976, of the moment Walter's sacrifice had changed everything, and he vowed that no soldier would ever again be left behind unacknowledged. Walter Douglas, the flag keeper, continued his daily ritual, a quiet act of devotion that spoke louder than any medal or ceremony. Each morning as the flag rose against the dawn, he felt a quiet peace, a sense that he had found his place in a world that had once turned its back on him. The children, the soldiers, the cadets, they all carried pieces of his story, ensuring that his sacrifice would never again be forgotten. And in his heart, Walter carried the simple truth that had guided him through it all. Small kindnesses, offered when they were needed, could light the way through even the darkest of circumstances. On a crisp autumn morning, the administrative offices of a sprawling military base buzzed with renewed purpose. A system overhaul, sparked by the tireless advocacy of a man named Walter Douglas, ensured that no service member would ever again slip through the bureaucratic crevices caused by classified operations or incomplete records. Walter, a retired soldier whose heart still beat in rhythm with the cadence of duty, had spent years quietly pushing for this change. His weathered hands, once steady on a rifle, now clutched reports and petitions, his resolve unshaken despite the slow grind of institutional reform. He felt the weight of every forgotten name, every unrecorded sacrifice, as if they were his own. The thought of a single comrade lost to history gnawed at him, a quiet ache that fueled his mission. Years later, as Walter turned 80, the base community came together to honor him in a way that matched his unassuming nature. The celebration was modest, held in a small mess hall adorned with a few streamers and a handwritten banner. Base personnel, young and old, gathered around folding tables, their faces lit with admiration for a man who had become a legend in their tight-knit world. The gifts they brought were simple, but carried the weight of deep gratitude. A crisp new American flag for his modest apartment, its stars gleaming with promise. A stack of heartfelt cards penned by military children, their uneven handwriting brimming with innocence and awe, and a walking stick, intricately carved by a wounded warrior in recovery, its grooves telling stories of resilience. Walter's eyes, clouded by age but sharp with memory, softened as he ran his fingers over the wood, feeling the care etched into every curve. Among the crowd stood Carter, Walter's old comrade, now retired and carrying the quiet dignity of a life well served. With a steady hand, he presented Walter with a Brotherhood coin, its surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. One side bore the bold insignia of Bravo 19, their old unit, a symbol of battles fought and bonds forged. The other side was engraved with words Walter had lived by, duty when no one is watching. As he pressed the coin into Walter's palm, Carter's voice was thick with emotion, a rare crack in his stoic facade. "This is for you, old friend," he said, his eyes locking with Walter's. "For all the times you did what was right, even when no one saw." Walter, never one for the spotlight, felt a lump rise in his throat. The weight of the moment, the room full of faces, the quiet pride in their eyes, pressed against the walls of his heart. "I never expected to be remembered," he admitted later, his voice barely above a whisper as he sat with Carter on a bench outside the hall. The evening air was cool, and the stars above seemed to listen. Carter chuckled, shaking his head, his own heart heavy with years of shared memories. "That was always your blind spot, Douglas. You never saw the ripples you left behind, the way you changed people just by being you." 5 years later, Walter passed away, his life slipping quietly into the annals of time. His official military funeral was a testament to the mark he'd left. Hundreds gathered under a gray sky, active duty soldiers in crisp uniforms, veterans with weathered faces, and families from the base community, their children clutching small flags. The air was thick with reverence, the kind that settles when a giant falls. The ceremony was precise, each fold of the flag deliberate, each note of the bugle piercing. But it was the morning after that carried the most profound tribute. At 7 military installations across the country, where members of Bravo 19 had once served, flags were raised in unison. Each was hoisted by a young soldier, their hands trembling not from cold, but from the weight of the story they had been told. Walter's story of quiet courage, of choices made in the shadows, had reached them, and they'd volunteered to honor him. With identical precision, each flag was folded and presented to a local school, accompanied by a message Walter had lived. Heroism isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right when no one's watching. Walter's life was a lesson in the power of the unseen. He taught us that true heroes don't chase headlines or medals. They walk among us unnoticed, their greatness woven into the fabric of everyday acts. They might be the security guard at your apartment complex, their vigilant eyes hiding stories of valor. The bus driver who greets each passenger with a nod, never missing a shift despite the weight of their own burdens. Or the hospital doorkeeper who remembers every name, their kindness a quiet rebellion against indifference. For people like Walter, a simple thank you is often the only reward they seek, though their hearts carry the weight of sacrifices few could fathom. Walter Douglas had spent his final years sweeping a sidewalk outside a gate he once commanded, his broom moving with the same steady rhythm as his soldiers' march. To the untrained eye, he was just an old man, unremarkable in his routine. But those who knew him understood that his greatness wasn't diminished by obscurity, it was defined by it. In a world obsessed with instant validation, where every deed is shared and every moment photographed, Walter's life was a quiet rebuke. True worth, he showed us, often hides in plain sight, carried by those who serve without expectation. His story humbles us, urging us to look closer at the quiet ones, the ones who move through life without fanfare, their courage tucked into moments of terrible choice, when they decide that others matter more than themselves. So today, pause and look around. The Walters of the world are still out there, their stories waiting to be heard. They don't ask for recognition, but they deserve it. Their lives remind us that the most profound acts of courage happen far from the spotlight, in the silent decisions that shape who we are. We tell their stories not for applause, but to ensure that no good person is buried in silence. Walter Douglas, and those like him, deserve to be remembered, not for glory, but for the truth they lived, that the greatest heroes are often the ones who ask for nothing at all.